Good morning, Mallory.
Good morning. I just have one question about the data table.
Yeah.
So I haven't finished watching the whole video, but for the cube size, when it's 2 centimeters, would you just do, since the whole cube, like all around is 2.5 like centimeters long, would you just do 2.5 times 2 times 6 for the
So
area?
hold on one second. So you're referring to the data table that's in the lab, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't see 2.5. That's what I'm confused with. So let me
Oh,
pull up because maybe I missed something. All right, so I'm assuming this is where you're looking at, right?
yes.
Okay, so, and you're talking about this cube size, the 2 centimeter one?
Yeah.
All right, so you would just take this, each side is 2 centimeters, so it would just be 2 times 2 times 6.
Oh, okay. Okay, I was getting confused then with the video. Is she doing like different sizes?
She might have been doing
Okay.
2.5 centimeter size and a 3.5. So yeah, she might have been.
Okay.
The best, I'm trying to think what would be the best resource for this. For this lab, the way this is set up, your best resource is, are the notes in here? I know the notes were in this one. If you were in the notes, and I also think this is a diagram that's in the book, this right here. That's essentially the calculations that you're doing. You have a 1 by 1 centimeter, so that would be the first one. And then you have the 2 by 2 centimeter. And so here's your math for the surface area, 2 times 2 times 6. So hopefully you got 24.
Yeah. So I just have to do that for all three of them?
Yeah, and then you would do the same for the 3 centimeter. So you're going to have 3 times 3 is 9, 9 times 6, and you get 54.
Okay.
So that's what you're going to have in these 3 boxes right there. Then when you get to these 3 boxes, you're just taking those lengths and just multiplying them by themselves 3 times, because that would represent the length, the width, and then also the height.
Okay. So for 2, it'd just be 2 times 2 times 2.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And is the second data table like that too?
So the second data so these 2 numbers, so basically what you're doing then is you're taking, the way the data table is set up is so that like for example, this says surface area to volume ratio right in here. If you take this number, surface area, and divide by this number, that is this answer. So it's this column divided by this column for each one will give you the answers in this column. And then if you take the answers in this column of surface area to volume and just make sure that you're reduced to the simplified, which usually the volume is going to be 1, then your answers simplified would be over here. And when I mean simplified, I'm referring to, if we look here, you've got 6 to 1 is already simplified, but 24 to 8, that's not simplified. So you would take the the common denominator, right? And you would end up with 8. So 8 goes into 8 1 times, and 8 goes into 24 3 times. So it's 3 to 1. So that's simplified. And then the same here, 54 over 27. That's what you're going to get in the data table, but in the last column, you'll simplify it to, and it'll be a 2 to 1 ratio. In
Okay.
other words, 27 goes into 54 twice, and 27 goes into 27 once, and so you end up with a 2 to 1 ratio. So those are the answers that go in this column. The answers you have now, the bigger numbers, will be in this column. Are you okay for that?
Yeah.
All right. So what you're really focusing on is this column and there's all this work in between. You're really doing all the work just to get the answer in this column, because that's the column that's most important, because that's telling you how much surface area there is for every unit of volume that the cell has. And you want the larger surface area relative to that one unit. That's why it's so important that students don't just take the bigger numbers. So like, you see here 54 to 27, you might look at that, oops, and you might say, oh, wow, 54, that's a big surface area. That's definitely going to be most effective. But you don't realize that when you simplify it, it's really a 2-to-1 ratio. Whereas this smaller cell is a 6-to-1 ratio. So for every unit of volume, there's, in your mind, you should think of 6 opportunities for food to get into the cell. Or for every unit of volume, there's 6 opportunities to excrete waste or send a product out of the cell. So it's more of your advantage to be made up of many of these smaller cells than it is to be made up of fewer of the larger cells.
Yeah.
So that's what this data table is bringing out. Then you go through the lab, and after you take the cubes out, when you finish watching the procedure, the girl is going to cut them in half. And when she cuts them in half, what she's going to do is she's going to measure the distance from the outside of the cube to where the pink, the inside remains pink. But you have to, the trickiest part to this is that students forget that you're diffusing on both ends. So a student might measure, let me see, I don't know if I can really zoom in here. I guess I can do that. All right. So a student, and I don't have my pen here, but a student might measure the distance from where the pink is here to where it's clear, and that might be a 1/2 centimeter. They don't realize that it didn't just diffuse a 1/2 centimeter because it diffused a 1/2 centimeter on this side. It also diffused a 1/2 centimeter in on this side. So it really diffuses a whole centimeter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Because in other words, if you were going to calculate the volume of pink, how much of the, because we're talking about a 3-dimensional object, so we really want to know what volume of the inside of the cell did not get the food. In this case, hydrochloric acid is what we're using as a food source. And whatever didn't get the hydrochloric acid remains pink. That's how you know. So if you're trying to measure the volume, you have to measure on both sides. Otherwise, you're going to get an inaccurate measurement. Let me just zoom this back out. Okay. When you watch the video, I'm not actually sure if they address that clearly, but that's, of course, why I would go over this on Thursday. Data table 2 is important because a lot of times students will make the claim that the smaller cube allows the diffusion faster. That's not really true. I mean, you might say it allows the nutrient to get to the center of the cell sooner. I could give you that, but not faster. And here's the reason why it's inappropriate to say that. If you're going to do a lab and you're going to compare how much of the nutrient gets into these cubes, then it would be unfair to make the cubes out of different materials. So we have to assume if they're made out of the same material, then the rate at which the hydrochloric acid will diffuse through the, and it's called agar, the rate at which it goes through should be the same. Because then you'd have too many variables. I mean, imagine making the larger cube out of a material that allows stuff to diffuse through it very quickly. If that were the case, and you made the smallest cube out of a material that had stuff that diffused very slowly, then you might get the same answer and not be able to address whether the larger cube was more effective than the smaller cube because you made them out of different materials. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So a lot of times the kids will say that the diffusion rate was faster in the smaller cube. It's not. The diffusion rate is the same. And so in data table 2, you'll notice, and this is real data. So Notice that there's a number 4 here, and then there's 2 5s. What happens in this case is a lot of times when kids measure, you're talking millimeters. And a millimeter on a ruler, I don't know if I have mine with me, but a millimeter on a ruler is very, very, very small. So if you were measuring the width of this cube, the part that's white, when we do this lab in class, and here's one of the, and I don't address this, but since you're in the live session, I will. When I do it in class, I always have the kids do the larger cube first, and I have them put that in the hydrochloric acid because ahead of time. So the cubes are supposed to be in there for about 2 minutes when we do this in the classroom, but I always have the kids keep the larger cube in for at least a minute before they put the other 2 cubes in. And here's why. When you take the cubes out, I guess it just, I guess because they're out of the hydrochloric acid, students think that that's it. Okay, they're out. They're going to stop, and I can take my time, and I can cut this, and I'll measure it. But they don't realize that the hydrochloric acid is still absorbed in the cube. So as the students take the cubes out, and they sit there and they're talking to each other, the diffusion rate is still continuing. So a lot of times what will happen is the measurements that they get are inaccurate because they took too long to cut and measure. They cut, they sat, they waited, they talked, and then they measured, and they get different answers. So my point is that it's very possible that this student maybe cut as soon as they took it out of the hydrochloric acid, okay? But these two, maybe they took a little longer. But if you look at them, a millimeter is very, very little. So the difference between the depth of diffusion in cube 1 and 2 and 3 is only a difference of a millimeter. That's very, very little. So if you account for error, now these are rate problems. So if you look at the units that are for rate, you'll notice that it's millimeters over minutes. So rate problems are written as distance over time. If you solve for units when you're doing math problems, it'll make it a lot easier so you don't get confused. But it's millimeters over minutes. That means that if you were to do this math problem, you would have millimeters on the top of a fraction sign and minutes on the bottom. Well, when I look at my numbers here, I have millimeters for depth of diffusion. So that must be the number that's on top. And time, which is minutes, that must be the number that's on the bottom. And so this tells you that you're taking 5 and dividing it by 4. And that would be your, oops, go fix that. That would be your answer that went in that space.
Okay.
And all right. And when you do it again, 5 divided by 4, you're going to get the same answer. And when you take 4 divided by 4, yes, you're going to get a little bit different answer, but it's pretty darn close to the other two. So if I was looking at this and I was trying to figure out, okay, here's my lab. I know what my independent variable is. I know what my dependent variable is. What are some constants? Oh, the constants, one of them, by the way, must be the rate of diffusion. And the reason that it's a constant is because the cubes are made out of the same material. So if they're made out of the same material, then you should assume that the rate at which the hydrochloric acid will diffuse through each cube is going to be the same. And because that's a constant, that allows you to isolate your variable, which is the size of the cube, because that's what the purpose of the lab is. You're basically trying to figure out which cube size allows the hydrochloric acid to reach the most of the inside of the cell by percent, not by how much, but by percent. Do you understand the difference in what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it's really important. You know, there's more diffusion that occurred in the bigger cell for sure, because it's got a larger surface area. But the percentage of the inside of the cell that's reached is very small compared to the smaller one. So if you were a factory and you had to feed all your workers, all the people in pink are the ones who starved to death, even though you have a lot bigger storefront. And if you were this factory, you could see only a few people, because even though you're smaller, you're still able to reach the middle more effectively than the rest. That's the point here. So if you don't walk away with that, then you miss the, then you miss the target on there. So it's really important that that's what you walk away with, because the next question is going to be, okay, so it's clear that there's a certain ratio at which cells are most effective at reaching the inside of the cell, because they have to be able to get everybody fed, including the nucleus. And they have to be able to get all the waste from the center of the cell all the way out. And there's a certain size. So it makes sense to be made up of a lot of these cells, because from here, we're going to go into, okay, so how then is it possible that cells can make so many copies of themselves and never screw up? And what does it look like when cells do screw up? And do all cells divide? Or are there some cells that actually don't divide? Like they just live forever? Like, do they get old? So these are all the ideas of like, why do cells divide, to get you into like the mode of genetics. And so all we're trying to figure out now is give it a reason for why cells divide. And one of them is because they can only get so big. So you have to divide. And then we'll add in the other stuff. They get too old, they're not functioning as well, and then that's another reason why they would divide. And then cells actually have like really unique things that they can do to improve their surface area. Red blood cells, for example, I already mentioned this once, but if you take a cell and you like pinch it in the middle, it'll get a dimple in the middle, and that dimple actually increases the surface area. So that's just a strategy that your blood cells do to maximize the amount of oxygen they can extract out of the air. And then, so once you're done with the 2 data tables, I mean, you're pretty much, that's it. But I'll fill you in as to like what you're looking at with the 3rd data table. So how this would work in a classroom. And I mean, I have this lab, so I could probably pull up this is real data. Okay, so what what you would be looking here is let me just make sure, because you don't calculate this. I just want to go from your data table, surface area to volume ratio. All right, so we don't have you do this math here in this particular setting. We would have had you do it in the classroom. And what you would have done is you would have compared how much of, well, let me show you the picture. You would have compared how much of the cells are clear relative to how much of the cell is pink, and based it on a percentage. In other words, if I look at, let's say, the 1 centimeter cell, just by eyeballing it, it looks to me that, and let's talk volume, not surface area. So let's talk volume. Let's envision we have this cube in front of us. I'm going to say that it looks to me that about 75% of this cell is clear and only about 25% of it is pink. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's keep that thought and let's go down to that data table. For the 1 cube, most of the students got actually 90, oh, they got high numbers. They got 99% of it was reached and only 1% of it, or less than 1% of it. Okay, well, I guess that's the case. I don't know. To me, it looks more like a 75-25. Point is, the amount of the percentage of the cell, the total volume that received the nutrient, was definitely the highest, like 98, definitely the highest in the smaller cell. Do you agree that the percentage of clear is the most in the small one compared to the other 2?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's for sure. All we're doing here is comparing percentages. So now we go to the next data tape, the next one. This would be the 2 by 2. And it looks that most of my students found that about 70-something% of the cell was reached. Okay. So I guess, I mean, you know what it is here? It's hard because this is cut, so we're not really looking at a whole cube here, so it's hard to see it as the mathematics. But I would definitely agree that it's less than the first one and more than the third one. So do my numbers at least agree with that? Yes. Is 78 less than the first one, but a little bit better than the larger one? Yes. So now I go to number 3, and it says it's about 50% or so. And so when you look at this, whether it's 50% or not, do we still agree that this one received the least amount of nutrient? I would say yes. And that's what this data table is showing you, but it's just doing it on percentages. That's all. So based on that table, at some point in the week, you'll get to the post-lab questions. And since you're on, I might as well help you with this. If the acid represents nutrients, explain which model cell was the best at having most of its volume reachable by the nutrients. That's a little wordy. So basically what they're saying is which one was able to get the nutrients in the furthest. If the acid represents the nutrients, let's reread this one more time. If the acid represents nutrients, explain which model cell was the best at having the most of its volume reachable by the nutrients. So that means if you go to your data table, you would be looking for the one that had the highest percent that received the nutrient. Which one would that be? We're talking which cube had the highest percent of reaching the nutrient.
The first cube?
Correct. So you don't want to say first, just say 1 centimeter, because
Okay.
you're really referring to this. If you're going to say first instead of 1 centimeter, I prefer you say smallest cube.
Okay.
All right, because that's really what you're getting at. Okay, so, and justify your answer with numerical evidence. So what you were going to have to do is you're going to have to go back to this data table, and you're going to have to extract some meaning or some support from this column. So if you were to take the lab and think about what you're doing in the lab, without going into numbers and stuff, how would you explain why this cube received more nutrient than the larger cubes?
Well, there's more, like, based on what it looks like, or what?
No, like you're trying to explain to someone, and someone says, how is it possible that this cube allowed more nutrient by percent? If we look at the percentage of it, the pink is very small here. So most of this cube received nutrient. It almost got to the center of it. Whereas the larger cube, by percent, very little percentage of it received the nutrient. So how would you explain that?
I don't know.
Okay, so what you're trying to wrap your brain around is the idea that the surface area in the smaller cube, something about the surface area to volume ratio in the smaller cube was different than the surface area to volume ratio in the larger cube.
Okay.
See, what you're missing is mathematically, if you increase the size of an object, the surface area does not increase at the same rate as the volume. I know that's mind-blowing, okay? So if I give you a box, my daughter just gave my wife one of these things. You probably saw it on Instagram. It's the box that you open up and the pictures fall, and then there's another box and you open up and another pictures fall, and it ends up like in a blossom kind of thing. It's like a box and a box and a box. If you increase the size of the box, the surface area of the box doesn't increase at the same rate as the volume. So what's happening in these cubes is that even though this has a bigger surface area, it's not the same ratio as the volume. If it were, then each one of these cubes would have the exact same percentage of pink inside. If this cube has, the data table says 1% of it is pink, and the surface area expanded the same rate as the volume, then this cube would have also had the same. 1% would have been pink. And this cube would have had the same, and only 1% would have been pink. And we wouldn't have to be multicellular, or we would be multicellular because our cells do a lot of functions, but we wouldn't need billions and trillions of each of the types of cells. But because the surface area expands at a rate slower than the volume. As objects get bigger, the surface area can't keep up with the volume. So if you're a cell and you need to meet the demands of the things in the center of the cell, as cells grow bigger, there gets a point where the surface area, no matter how big you are, you can't get enough food in fast enough to reach the center of the cell. So if you can't feed the center of the cell, well, then the cell's going to die. Parts of it are going to die. So now take that thinking and you bring it to this question. If the acid represents the nutrients, explain which one, which cell was the best at having most of its volume reachable. And you already said the smallest one because 98% of it was reachable. Now he's asking why. Why is the smaller one reachable? And what you're drawing from is you're trying to come up with, your answer comes right from here, and it has to do with because the surface area to volume ratio in the smaller cell was in some way different than the surface area to volume ratio in the larger cell. Do you have these numbers done yet?
Not yet. I was going to do it after this, but I have the chart right next to me.
Do you have it? Okay, what numbers do you have done? Do you have these done here?
I just did 2 because I thought that was what the video was doing, but I should.
All right, let's do them all. We'll do them all. We'll do them really quick. You ready?
Okay.
Okay, so 1 times 1 times 6. I don't want to type the answer in because all these kids are going to get the answers who are logged in.
6.
Yep.
Hang on.
All right. Take your time. No worries.
All right. So 6.
Okay. Now we're going to go to the adjacent column. So now can I highlight it? Where am I? Do you see where I'm? There I am. Now do 1 times 1 times 1.
1.
Okay. Surface area to volume ratio. You're going to have surface area. What number did you have in the first column?
6. So it'd be
Okay.
6 over
6.
1.
Well, or do 6 and then do the colon. That's what this little, you want to have that.
Okay.
You want to have that little thing there. Yeah. So do 6 colon 1.
Okay.
So it should look like this. You see that?
Just a little dot dot. Yeah.
Yeah, just like that. Should look just like that. Okay. It's already simplified. Because you already have it down to 1. You've already got your fraction simplified. 6. So, 6-1. That's the same thing as saying 6 over 1. You are correct. It's the same thing as saying 6 divided by 1. It's all the same. So you're going to have 6 over 1. Or 6 with the semicolon. All right. So now let's go to cell number. Now, just remember, so the surface area, that means for every unit of volume, I have 6 units of surface area. That's pretty good. That means for every unit, I have a large surface area to be able to meet the demands of the cell. All right, so let's do number 2. We already did this one, right? It was 2 times 2 times 6, 24, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
then it'd be,
and then we got 8, right?
How did we do that one again?
So this one here,
2 times 2 times 2.
This one is 2 times 2 times 2. There we go.
Okay.
Did you get 8?
Yeah.
All right. Now you're going to go here and you're going to take your first column and your second column and you're going to put them next to another. You're going to have 24 colon 8.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you need to reduce that. So if I want to reduce the fraction, basically I have a fraction 24 over 8.
Would it be 3 to 1?
Yep. Okay. So now you already saw that I doubled my cube size from 1 to 2, and my surface area to volume ratio is half as good. That means even though I'm a bigger cube, I am half as effective at meeting the nutrients. So if you and I were in a race, and you gave me 4 minutes to feed all of the people in my office, and you had 6 people feeding the number of people in your office, and I had 3, I have 3 for every one. So if I have more people, it's going to take me twice as long. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's only a 3 to 1. So for every 3 servers, for every 3 waiters I I can only reach one person, or for every person in my diner, in my restaurant, there's only 3 waiters to serve them. But in your restaurant, for every person, there's 6 waiters. So imagine how much faster. Do you see what I mean? How much? Not, I don't want to say how much faster.
Yeah.
That's the term I've been trying to. But how able you will be to get everybody in your restaurant fed. If I have more people in my restaurant and I only have a 3-to-1 ratio, because remember my restaurant's bigger, so I have more people. So I have more people than you. So I already have more people to feed, and I have less of effective wait staff, half as what effective as yours is. So even though I have more waiters, I have so many more people to feed than you. That's what happened here. It's like your restaurant is the size of the classroom, and we doubled the classroom, but we didn't double the number of people. So your restaurant has a class, your classroom, you're in my classroom, and there's 24 kids in it. Okay, that's what this represents. This 2 represents doubling my classroom, but not doubling the number of kids, tripling the number of kids. So I have twice the space, but now instead of double the kids, I have 3 times the number of kids. Now we're going to go to the third one, and we'll see what happens there. Let's do this one. So now we're going to go 3 times 3 times 6. That's going to give you this answer right here.
$54.
Okay. And then you're going to go 3 times 3 times 3 to get that answer.
27. So that's 3. That was just 3 times 3 times 3.
Yep. So now in this one,
So
basically you have 54 colon 27. And then you're going to reduce that. So it should be to 1. So you have to make the volume 1. So what number divides into both 27 and 54 that makes 27 become 1?
So would it be 2-to-1?
Correct.
Okay.
So if you I'm really trying to get this. So let me see. Okay. So in your restaurant, we're going to have 24. So your classroom, there's 24 students, but there's 6 teachers to work with every student. How about that? Maybe that works. So imagine 24 kids in the class, but there's 6 teachers to ask questions. So that's pretty good, right? Do you think that 6 teachers will be able to answer all the questions of 24 kids if there's 6 teachers for every kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? I would think so. Okay. So now you get to the next classroom, and it's double the size, but it has more kids. It doesn't have just double the kids. It has more kids. So now I only have 3 teachers for every kid. It's a 3-to-1. Well, if I have more kids too, it's going to take me longer to meet the needs of all of the kids. If we're given the same amount of time, in 60 minutes, I can't possibly meet all the questions of all the kids the same. Maybe I can, but I definitely can't do it the same as you can in an hour. It may take me an hour and a half, but in that same time frame, there's a percentage of questions I won't be able to answer that is definitely greater than the percentage of questions your class can answer. Is that making sense?
Yeah. So
now you
like the smaller it gets, the harder it is to get to everybody.
No, the smaller it gets, the easier it is.
The easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now let's go to the largest classroom. Now this classroom's 3 times the size, but it's 3 times the size. It doesn't have 3 times the number of kids in your classroom. Maybe it has like 4 times the number of kids, and it's just me and one other person. So now I got like 80 kids in the room. It's just me and one other person, and I had 60 minutes to answer all the questions that those kids have. Am I going to be able to reach every kid's question?
No.
Okay, so which classroom reaches the greatest percentage of students' questions?
3-to-1.
The greatest percentage of students' questions. Percentage would be how many questions I answered out of all the possible questions there are. So let's go back one more. You'll get it. When you get it, you'll be like, I got this. So let's go to the first one. Your classroom, you have 6 teachers and you only have 24 kids. Now, are you going to get a lot of questions?
Probably not.
Probably not. So will you be able to answer almost all of them?
Yeah.
So you'll be able to answer almost 100% of their questions in 60 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now you go to the next one and we double the classroom. Okay. So the classroom's twice as big. So we can obviously fit more students, but we're not doubling the number of students. We're actually tripling the number of students because remember what I said. When you double the size, the surface area doesn't increase as big as the volume. So the number of kids is going to get slightly bigger than double. So now my students goes from, you had 24, I'm going to have 72. Not going to have 48. I'm going to have 72. I doubled my space, but I tripled, so to speak, my number of students. And there's only 3 teachers in the room. Now I have 3 teachers, 72 kids. Am I going to be able to answer in the same time frame as you, 60 minutes, all of those student questions?
No.
No. So we will be answering a lower percentage of students' questions, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go to the third one. Now I've got triple the space. There's only 2 people, and I don't know, I've got 160 kids or something like that. Now I'm definitely going to be able to answer way fewer questions than the previous 2. So the one that allows the largest percentage of students' questions to be answered is which cube size?
1.
Right.
Okay.
So
Now I got it.
So it makes sense for a school to be effective. If I want to teach in a school, does it make more sense to make the school and have only 20 classrooms of 160 kids in each classroom? Or does it make more sense to have 30 classrooms with only 20 kids in each classroom and 3 or 4 teachers in each of those rooms?
The second one,
Right.
the 20. Yeah.
Right. So your body is doing exactly that. It's more effective to have a billion tiny little classrooms than it is to have larger classrooms because you can't possibly meet the demands of all of your students in the larger classroom. And so now that's a literary way of looking at it. You're looking at it visually. You should be looking at it. Let's see. You want to look at this. That's what you're visually looking at. That's your classroom and the percentage of students' questions you answered, almost all of them. That's my classroom even though I'm bigger, I had less people per a student that could answer a question, even though I may have had more teachers in the room than you, okay, because I have a larger area. So I may have had more teachers, but the ratio of teacher to student was lower. So therefore, I couldn't possibly have answered all the questions. And even in the bigger room, I may have still had more teachers. I had 54 teachers. You only had 6 teachers, but my ratio ended up being 2 to 1. So even though I had 54 teachers, I had 100 and something kids, so it was only a 2 to 1 ratio. So I could only possibly answer a lower percentage of the students' questions. So does that resonating now?
Yes. Makes a lot more sense now.
Okay. So that's where you're at. So then tomorrow, because we're going to run out of time, but tomorrow you'll be looking at these questions. We nailed this one, and what I really did was we nailed this right here because that's really, 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 really important. And then I would just look at the next bunch of questions and just take a look and see if they work for you, and then we'll go over them. Probably on Thursday, I'll go over the rest of this.
Okay.
So you're okay then for today. I guess you still have these rate problems here to do, right?
Yeah, but I think I got it.
Yeah, it's 5 divided by 4, 5 divided by 4, and then 4 divided by 4. So the rate here is 1 millimeter per minute.
I'll get decimals for them, right? That's
yes,
okay?
Yes, you will. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. I think I'm good now.
All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
see.